Welcome, listener, in the shadows. We bring stories into the light. Join me as we explore the encounters no one speaks of and the things that watch from the dark. You were never supposed to see this, but since you have, you might as well wear it. From the vaults of the shadows, a new collection of unsettling apparel and artifacts pulled straight from the stories that were never meant to surface. Soft, worn-in shirts and hoodies that feel like something you dug out of a locked trunk in an abandoned ranger station. This isn't just merch, it's evidence. The Summoning at Wrenmore, Chapter 1. The Letter and the Fen. I had not heard the name Wrenmore in over 30 years. Not since I was a child. Not since the black and white photograph on my grandmother's hearth, brittle with age and stained at the edges, showed a line of indistinct, mud-slick cottages swallowed by reeds. Even then, the name was only muttered, like a broom sweeping away something shameful. But then came the letter. It arrived in a yellowed envelope sealed with real wax, red and slightly crumbling, stamped with an impression I didn't recognize. Concentric rings around a sheaf of wetland reeds. No return address. The handwriting was precise, not quite calligraphic, but with a studied formality that reeked of old paper, old families, and older debts. Dr. Harold Quince, by decree of the late Angus M. Quince, you are the sole inheritor of the Wrenmore property. The name struck me like cold water. My uncle, long thought dead or vanished, apparently hadn't been either, merely forgotten, hidden away in the mists of the English fenland where our family name had first festered. I didn't remember him, not truly, just a story. A man who drank mercury to see spirits, who spoke in twinned voices at midsummer, who walked barefoot in winter and said the snow tasted like voices. I should have thrown it away, but disgrace does strange things to a man. After the incident at Cambridge, a plagiarism claim, entirely fabricated, but made by someone with more tenure than I'd ever dreamed of, I had become a laughingstock. My lectures on folkloric continuity and symbolic anthropology were quietly removed from the department website. I was left with dwindling savings, a flat I couldn't afford, and the kind of loneliness that pressed like a wet cloth over the soul. So I packed what I had left: field journals, my battered copy of the child myths of the Fenlands, and an old voice recorder in case I ever found something worth remembering, and I took the train north. Wrenmore was not on any active map. You had to take the train to Byford, then a bus that no longer ran, then walk 5 miles along a causeway barely wider than a cartwheel. The fog thickened the closer I came. It wasn't mist, it was something heavier, like the breath of the land itself. The fens swallowed noise too. My boots made no sound. Birds didn't call. My own thoughts echoed. The house sat alone, hunched into the earth like a wounded animal. Georgian bones, Victorian decay. Lopsided, sinking. Ivy curled up one side like veins beneath sallow skin. The windows were mostly boarded. On the door, nailed crookedly, was a sigil scratched into wood, not decorative, not Christian, and certainly not welcoming. Inside, the air smelled of iron and mold. Books were rotting on the shelves. Moss grew between the floorboards. The fireplace still held ashes that smelled like burned hair. A single chair faced the boarded window. A journal lay open on its seat. I recognized the handwriting. It was my own, but I hadn't written it. He returned without the crown. That was the first wrong. That night, I slept in the study, curled under moth-eaten throws. Wind scratched the boards. Something shifted in the reeds outside, slow and dragging, like something taller than it should be trying to walk where men weren't meant to. In the morning, there was a letter on the stoop. Fresh, dry, folded with reverent precision. The Wrenmore Antiquarian Society cordially invites you, Dr. Harold Quince, to a reenactment of the rites of salt and sedge. We believe your knowledge of folklore will be invaluable in restoring this important solstitial custom. P.G. Alder, secretary, they wanted my expertise, my interpretation. They didn't say the ritual was real. They didn't need to. Something in me, the bitter part that missed the lecture halls, the accolades, the way young students listened when I spoke, said yes before the rest of me could scream. Chapter 2, the reenactment. The Wrenmore Antiquarian Society was not a society in the proper sense. There was no charter, no building, No official record I could find beyond some passing references in early 1900s folklore journals, mostly dismissed as eccentric rural clubs with theatrical leanings. And yet, on the appointed day, June 18th, near midsummer, they arrived. 5 of them. 4 men and 1 woman, all dressed in somber, archaic garb, dark woolen coats even in the heat, boots stained with peat, scarves that looked like they had been spun from lichen. Their faces were ordinary but left no impression. I would struggle, even now, to describe them. Their leader, P.G. Alder, was tall and dry-throated, a man who spoke as if he were translating himself from memory. "It's not so much a ritual," he said, "as a memory made solid, a reenactment of belief. Our task is preservation. You understand?" I nodded. I didn't understand. We gathered at the edge of the fen at dusk. Alder gave me a script, handwritten, bound in thread, supposedly translated from the Wrenmore verses, a now lost 17th century fen hymn book that I had once written about in a footnote. I had never seen this translation before. The ink smelled fresh. The symbols were old. There were roles. I was to play the rememberer. They would be the 4 winds without name. The Crownless One, the absent regent, as Alder called him, was not to be named aloud, nor was he to be looked at directly, even in pantomime. To look upon what is crownless, Alder said, is to forget the shape of thrones. He smiled like a child reciting something learned phonetically. They began with a circle of salt drawn into the wet earth, the salt mixed with crushed nettles and what Alder claimed were sheep's teeth. I assumed theatrics. I assumed wrong. Then came the chant, low, rhythmic, in a cadence that didn't belong to any modern meter. It pulsed more than it rhymed, syllables falling like water droplets into a still pond. I joined, stumbling at first, but something in my throat seemed to remember the words before my mind could form them. I could feel the vibrations in my chest. That's when I heard it, a 6th voice. It didn't belong to any of us. It was breathless, cracked like split bark, and deeper than any throat I'd ever heard. It joined perfectly, harmonizing in a dissonant hum, and for a moment the air went thick and still. I looked around. No one else reacted. They just kept chanting. Something moved in the water, just beyond the ring of reeds. I caught a glimpse, tall, thin, like a man with the proportions of a deer. Not quite cloaked, not quite bare. The reeds swayed around it as if pushed from beneath. Then silence. The chant ended. Alder nodded and clapped his hands once. "The rite of recollection is complete," he said. We walked back in silence. No questions were allowed after the first act. That was the rule, I was told. There would be 4 more acts on successive nights, each one deeper, each one closer to the source. That night, I reviewed the recording. I had placed the device behind the salt ring, unobtrusive. Its red light was still blinking when we left. When I played it back, my voice was there. So were the others. But one voice came too late, after we had stopped. A long, deliberate phrase spoken in a language I didn't recognize, with the cadence of a command. I slowed it down. The syllables formed branching echoes, as if the words were being spoken through water and mirror. And then, something else. The sound of breath from inside the recorder. I opened the casing. It was wet. Chapter 3, the third hand, I woke with ink under my fingernails. It wasn't the usual smear of graphite or pen tip from late-night scrawling. I hadn't written anything, I was sure of it. But there it was, dark, ochre ink, not quite black, seeping into the cuticle of my left hand. My palms strung as if I'd gripped something with thorns. On the desk, 5 pages of notebook paper, filled margin to margin in what looked like calligraphy, looping and angular. Not English, not Latin either, though something about it felt translated. Like a language that knew it had been buried and was crawling back up through the bones of others. Some symbols repeated like punctuation, sharp, branch-like shapes, reminiscent of elk antlers or old forestry sigils. The more I stared at them, the more I noticed they pulsed slightly on the page, as if some part of my eye refused to believe they were still. One phrase appeared at the bottom of each page in larger script. He remembers us in pieces. Let us grow into his shape. I didn't remember writing it, but my left hand ached. My knuckles were dark with bruising, the tendons tight like something had gripped me from the inside. That day's reenactment was different. We met not at the edge of the fen, but in a hollow clearing deeper in, where the trees sagged with wet moss, and the ground sloped toward a central depression. A natural amphitheater, Alder called it, where the first breath was offered. They were dressed again, though now with veils. The woman, whose name I'd never caught, wore a crown of woven antlers and willow twigs. It wasn't symbolic, not anymore. Tonight we speak for the voice that has no throat, Alder said. Tonight he listens through you. They asked me to lie down. I refused at first, but Alder's gaze was patient, not persuasive but inevitable, as if he already knew I would. The moment my back touched the cold peat, I felt it, something beneath me, not moving, breathing. The chant began. My ears rang. At first, the same rhythm, the same Fen verse cadence, but then it changed. Shifted key, became sharper, not violent but deliberate, intent, and threaded through it again that sixth voice, rasping and precise, almost amused. It called out one name, not mine, but my father's. After that night, I stopped sleeping properly. Every dream was water. My bones were always wet. I dreamed of walking through the fen on hooves that broke the surface tension of black ponds without ever making a ripple. My skin cracked into bark. I watched moss creep up my legs and blossom into teeth. Each morning, more writing. My left hand began twitching during the day. At first a tremor, then gestures, little flicks, signs I didn't recognize, like someone else was practicing with it. And the audio. The next recording, hidden again, tucked under a root, was worse. 3 voices this time. One was me, one was Alder, and one, I swear to you, sounded exactly like my late uncle. But he's been dead for 6 years. He was saying the old family rhyme I hadn't thought of in decades. Don't look long at Wrenmore fen, or else it'll look back through when. A prince with none, a crown of skin, let not his stories in. My name was whispered after, not spoken, etched. Chapter 4, Offering Days. The offerings began 3 mornings after the third voice called my name. At first, it was a small bundle left on the porch of the old house, wrapped in waxed cloth, tied with willow bark. Inside were 3 human teeth, molars yellowed, their roots tangled with black moss. No note, no sign of passage, just the heavy silence of a place that had once forgotten it was being watched. The next day, it was a stag's antler, not shed but snapped, fresh blood still crusted along the break, laid perfectly perpendicular across my doorstep, like a sigil. I left it where it was. I told myself the society had left them, ritual props perhaps, some symbolic gesture. But the more I convinced myself, the more my stomach turned, because I knew ritual symbols. I'd studied them. These weren't meant for me to understand. They were meant to be accepted, and more came. Hair long and plaited, bound with strips of animal hide. A jawbone, not animal, not quite human either. The sockets were too shallow, the teeth too flat, fossilized in peat dark hues, and worst of all, a single, pale handprint on the inside of my window. From the 2nd floor. There were no footprints in the garden. The water in the fen was rising, inch by inch. The reeds pressed closer to the house like a crowd drawing breath. The air had changed too. Heavy, humid, sour-sweet with the scent of rot and fennel. Something about it stuck to the back of the throat, like breath that wasn't yours. I began to hear whispering in the floorboards, not at night. In the middle of the day, as I sat reviewing the translations from the reenactment. The recordings were now so degraded with static that I had to listen through headphones, straining to catch what hadn't been there when I'd spoken. My own voice, slowed down, seemed to carry on longer than it should have, ending sentences I never finished. "We do not offer because he hungers," I said in one. "We offer because he remembers what we were." I never said that, but the voice, my voice, sounded so certain. That evening, I followed the sound outside, guided by a hum in the reeds that didn't break underfoot. As I crossed the field behind the house, I noticed something. The trees around Wrenmore swayed gently in a wind I couldn't feel. It wasn't until I passed the fen's edge that I saw it, a standing stone. I'd never noticed it before, tall, narrow, buried in moss, not carved, grown, like bone thrust upward and weathered down into shape. At its base, another offering, a child's shoe aged with mud. Inside it, a knuckle bone wrapped in parchment. The note was written in my own hand. "He is near enough to listen now." You remember the way. I dropped it. I ran. That night I dreamt of a crown, not golden, not royal, woven from ribs and ashwood, held together with teeth. When I tried to lift it, it cut me not the skin, but something deeper, something that made me forget my own name when I woke. The society hadn't contacted me since the last gathering. The house phone had stopped working 2 days prior. The screen on my laptop flickered whenever I typed Wrenmore, and the mirror in the upstairs hallway showed a figure standing behind me, even when I stood alone. I think I know now. This wasn't a reenactment. This was a relay. The ritual wasn't meant to finish. It wasn't meant to appease anything. It was meant to open something old, something that once needed names to walk. And mine had been given. Chapter 5. The Crownless One comes walking. There are no clear lines in the fen anymore. Not between land and water. Not between yesterday and today. And certainly not between me and him. I first saw it, him, at dawn. A pale grey morning, the light murky with fog that seemed to push against the windows like breath on glass. I hadn't slept. Something in the reeds had been clicking, a dry, brittle sound like bone on bone, repeating in steady rhythm. It had counted up to 13, then stopped. Outside, the fields were flooded up to the fence posts. The standing stone had sunk halfway into the marsh, but still faced the house, as if watching. And then I saw the figure at the tree line. Tall, lean, wrapped in rotted moss and dripping lichen, black and green and brown like things dredged from the bottom of a bog. Its limbs were too long, its gait too smooth. It didn't move the way people do. It bent instead of walked. Shoulders rolling in half motions, elbows jutting wrong, fingers dangling like willow roots. It had no antlers, just the broken stubs of where they'd once been torn, not cut. A crown removed, not lost. He turned. I didn't see a face. Just the outline of ribs beneath the thin, clinging skin, and a hollow space where a head should have been, filled with writhing vines. He didn't approach. Not yet. He waited. That night the society returned, not in person, but in fragments. Envelopes slipped under doors. Cassette tapes stacked like offerings. Pages in my uncle's books were written in ink I didn't own. They said only one thing. You've invoked the fifth act. He's chosen his mouth. It took me a day to understand. I hadn't been assisting in a ritual. I had been wearing it, like a costume that had always been stitched for me, like a script passed down in blood. I found a mirror tucked away in the cellar, an old shaving glass half covered in mildew. My reflection wasn't wrong exactly, but late, a few seconds behind, a breath that didn't sink. I mouthed my name, and it smiled before I did. I smashed it. Later, in the recording room, I found my most recent entry. I don't remember making it. The voice was mine. The language was not. Guttural and low, filled with waterlogged consonants and animal croaks. The final words I understood, barely. The land has a king again, and he wears my skin. Outside, the clicking had begun again, only it wasn't distant this time. It was just beyond the wall. A sound like bone tapping stone, deliberate, patient. Counting. I whispered aloud to no one. You don't finish the ritual. But before I could speak the rest, something finished it for me. You survive long enough to be written into it. Chapter 6. Crown's roots. The water has risen into the hallway. It seeps through the wood like breath through cloth, leaving patterns that mimic veins or roots. I step carefully now, not because I'm afraid of falling, because I swear the floor pulses beneath my feet. It's not just wet. It's alive. I can't remember when I last saw the sky. The fen's fog has thickened into something else, something denser, a smothering weight that drinks sound and swallows time. When I look at my wristwatch, it clicks forward, then back. The hands spin for a moment, then stop. Midnight. Always midnight, even when the bird song starts. There shouldn't be birds here anymore. They stopped singing weeks ago. The crown's roots. That's what the society called this part. It's not a rite. It's a revelation. In the boxes I inherited from my uncle's estate, beneath the false floorboards in the attic I swore hadn't been there before, I found a sealed folio of his journals. Some were handwritten in his old crabbed style. Others were different, branched lines like antlers curling into glyphs. I traced them without meaning to, my hand remembering something my mind did not. Each page was titled Crown's Roots, numbered in descending order. like a countdown. In the margins were annotations in 2 inks, my uncle's, and another, mine. In a passage dated 10 years ago, I read, "The boy speaks in his sleep again." Antler phrases, the same 7 lines over and over, the one about the heart of the fen. It wasn't in the translations. I didn't teach him that. I was the boy. I think now I never chose folklore. I think it was planted in me, not passion, programming. The society, they aren't just antiquarians, they're caretakers. And my disgrace in the academic world, I believe it was engineered, a nudge, a gentle exhale to the only place left for me. Wrenmore, the family estate, my role in the ritual not chosen, assigned. This morning I woke to find a set of footprints circling my bed. Not mine, not booted, barefoot, wide set, uneven gait, moss trailed behind each step. The room smelled of wet antlers, of iron-rich water, of bark. There was a single phrase etched into the wall above my head in what looked like fingernail. The king has no crown. The voice must wear it. I tried to burn the journal. The fire hissed. The smoke came out green. And when the book curled, when the flames blackened its spine, I saw shapes in the smoke. The figure from the trees, the broken antlers, the crawling vines, and my face, twisting into something that grinned without joy, smiled without soul. Now the reeds knock on the window like fingers. The clicks have become words. I can almost make them out. The fen doesn't want me to run. It doesn't even want me to understand. It just wants me to finish the sentence it began before I was born. Chapter 7, Bone Chorus. The society is gone. No messages, no departures, just silence. As if they were written out of the land, the same way they tried to write themselves into its myths. Their quarters in the village, the rented farmhouse where they had stored their costumes, sound gear, annotated maps, is hollowed, not emptied. Hollowed, as though a version of the building remains, but the inside was erased, like chalk wiped from a slate. Only one thing was left, a wax cylinder recorder, still warm, still turning. It should have degraded years ago. No one uses these anymore. And yet when I placed the needle, the voice came through perfectly. But it wasn't any of theirs. The voice on the recording was mine, not recent, younger, maybe 15 years younger. That crackling, academic eagerness I recognized from old university lectures before the scandal. But I don't remember ever recording anything like this. We invoke the right of the hollow stag. We enter into the pact of roots and bone. Let the wet crown pass. Let the witness speak. And in the background, breathing, not from the lungs, wet, snapping, gill-like, like bark tearing slowly under pressure. Then a second voice, lower, layered wrong. It didn't speak a language, it bent one. Your will be spoken. I see them now when I close my eyes. The society members standing in the reeds at night, open-mouthed, still, empty as husks. A chorus of white bone, singing a note I can only hear in dreams. Their mouths unhinged, but not screaming, chanting. A single phrase in that forked glyph language, moving like ink across their tongues. You don't end the ritual. You end in it. I'm starting to forget my name, not all at once. It slips away in syllables. I caught myself introducing myself to a bird out loud, unprompted, but I said, "Ha," and stopped. There was something else on my tongue, something I didn't dare pronounce. I looked in the mirror that night. The lines in my face have rearranged, not older, not sicker, but corrected. Like something is carving away anything that doesn't fit the version of me that belongs to the fen. And my left hand, the one that writes without permission, now has black veins running beneath the skin. They look like roots. When I touch the lines, they hum. When I sleep, they burn. I tried to cut one open. The knife stopped. Not hit bone, not hit nerve. Hit something harder, something that rang. Like antler, tomorrow is the solstice, the final part of the rite, the wearing of the crown, as it was called in the lost pages of the red fen book. But there is no crown to wear. The Crownless One tore it off, gave it to the land, let it grow into us. Chapter 8, the Black Antler Rite. The solstice morning arrives grey and wet, not just with rain, but with the weight of water, as if the sky itself were sinking. Mist curls over the fen like exhalation, moving against the wind. The world smells of peat and rot, and beneath it, the coppery breath of something animal. I woke to a circle of teeth around my bed. not scattered, arranged. 8 human molars, still blood-wet, positioned in perfect radial symmetry, a ring unbroken. Beside them, a single black antler shard, shaped like an old bishop's crozier, was embedded in the floorboards, not stabbed in, grown in. It shimmered slightly in the low light, veined like obsidian. I knew it was an invitation, or a command. The ritual site was no longer where we'd left it. The clearing had changed, subtly, but completely. The trees had shifted inward, every root angled toward the center. Stones we'd marked with chalk glyphs had sunk entirely beneath the moss, leaving only patterns in the lichen, swirling, recursive, forming a language I now understand without learning. I stepped into the center. My body knew what to do. The words came unbidden, falling from my mouth in a low, groaning dialect that vibrated in my teeth. I didn't even recognize my own voice, not in pitch, not in cadence. It sounded older than me, older than language. And something answered. It rose from the water, not with splashes but parting, as if the fen weren't liquid but curtain drawn aside for its passing. The Crownless One walked on reeds that didn't bend, skin like dried kelp, stretched over too many ribs. Its arms hung low, past its knees, jointed backward, twitching faintly at the elbows like a praying mantis. Its head was vaguely cervid, but wrong, antlers broken on one side, a black moss veil hanging where a face should be. It had no eyes, but I felt it see me. Spoken, it said in me, not aloud, not heard. Felt across the lungs, the stomach, the marrow. I couldn't move, but I wasn't paralyzed. I was listening, and the instructions came. The final rite isn't a sacrifice. That was the error of those before. The society thought blood fed the Crownless One, but blood is just ink. They were never meant to offer. They were meant to be revised. The final rite is transcription. The creature is not god nor beast. It is scribe, a record keeper of rot. It doesn't demand life, it rewrites it. Etches new stories across the skin, changes the voice, alters the eyes to see what cannot be seen by others. To complete the rite, one must accept being rendered into the myth. Not dead, not living, witness. And so it placed the antler, the black crozier-shaped shard, against my forehead. I saw all the versions of me that had already happened. Some lived as madmen in huts. Some vanished into the swamp, re-emerging decades later with bark for hair. One walked into a university and strangled a theology professor mid-lecture while reciting the old tongue. He was smiling. All were Harold Quince, all were written, and all began here. When I woke, I was back in my house. The teeth were gone, the floorboards unbroken, but I have no shadow now. And when I speak, there's always a second voice, just slightly under mine. Chapter 9. What the fen remembers. I've stopped receiving mail. The postman no longer walks the lane, though I've seen him standing at the edge of the fen once or twice. Eyes wide, unmoving, letters slack in his hand. He never blinks. When I go to wave, he's gone between frames of thought, like an edit spliced from a reel. Time is misbehaving. My radio plays programs that haven't aired in decades, BBC broadcasts in Queen's English from 1938. Then suddenly switching mid-sentence to guttural, lichen-slick whispers I now comprehend without effort. One broadcast simply repeated, "Wrenmore remembers, Wrenmore remembers, Wrenmore," for 14 minutes before cutting to a child's voice reciting what I think was a birthright chant. And I can no longer find certain books in my house, or my own notes. Instead, I find diagrams of bone lattices, ritual calendars etched in charcoal, and pressed plant specimens that never existed. I don't remember making them, but the handwriting is mine. Or it was. The transformation is not just physical, it is historical. The more I dig, the more I realize that the Crownless One isn't adding to the world, it's replacing it. What the fen remembers becomes the only version of truth, and the fen is remembering through me. Old county maps have changed. Where once there were hamlets and grazing commons, now there are hand-drawn markers. Shriving Pool, Antler Dell, the Bog-Eyed Chapel. One map dated 1892 labels the entire region territory of the Crownless. No cartographer recalls this, but now they exist. My old thesis on the symbolic kingship of antlered beings in pre-Celtic Britain is no longer cited in online databases. Instead, it's replaced by a monograph titled Oaths in Moss, The Living Histories of Wrenmore Fen, authored by someone named Quince. That name now appears on my utility bills, my driver's license. I tried introducing myself at the village pub last week. I said, Harold Quince. They looked at me blank. Then one of them leaned forward and muttered, "You mean Halward? That you?" The society members are gone, all but Fletcher, the soft-voiced archivist. I found him sitting waist-deep in the fen at dawn, his body perfectly still. He was holding a leather-bound book, soaked, crumbling, and letting the current drag the pages out, one by one, into the reed-choked current. He did not blink. His mouth was full of crow feathers. When I pulled him free, he began to hum the same refrain I'd heard on the radio, Wrenmore remembers. He wouldn't stop, even when I shook him, even when I screamed. His eyes had no whites left, just black moss, veined and alive, twitching in the sockets. I left him there. He smiled as I walked away. Now even the stars are shifting. I swear they're forming the glyphs I've seen in my sleep. When I draw them, my hands tremble with anticipation, as if each sigil is a word waiting to be spoken aloud, a command, a rewrite, a deletion. The ritual was never about summoning. It was about remembering the thing that never left. We are the forgetful ones. The land is not. The fen does not want my death. It wants my identity, rewritten until I was always here, always part of it. A man-shaped vessel for the story, the land can no longer speak on its own. And I am beginning to feel that I never truly arrived at Wrenmore. I returned. Chapter 10. The Monarch Beneath the Water. It began with the rain. Not a storm, just a fine, unceasing mist that soaked everything but fell too gently to be heard. It hadn't stopped for days. My roof sagged beneath it. The walls inside the cottage bulged with damp. And somewhere beneath the floorboards, I swear, something was drinking it in. The air smelled of rot and reverence. When I stepped outside, I found hoofprints, split and deep, trailing from the edge of the fen to my doorstep. They weren't there the night before. I hadn't heard a sound. No creature in Britain leaves prints like those, not unless it walks upright. I didn't flee, I followed. The land was different this time, not overgrown, arranged. Trees stood in ritual circles. The reeds had bent themselves into geometric paths. The fen had become a cathedral, and I had been summoned to its altar. The further I walked, the quieter the world became. Not silence, submission. No birds, no breeze. Even my own heartbeat felt hesitant. Like the body it belonged to was no longer certain it had the right to exist here. At the heart of Wrenmore, where the fen deepens into a black pool, it stood. The Crownless One. Its antlers were wrong, broken on one side, jagged as old bone. Its skin was stretched too thin, draped like rotting parchment over a frame not meant to be human. Its ribs moved with its breath. Its mouth hung open, moss-threaded and damp. But its eyes saw nothing and everything. It did not blink, it did not speak. And yet I heard it, not with ears, with memory. Ancient, buried memory. The Crownless One does not command. It awakens what was always in you, the part that belongs to the marsh, the part that remembers what kingship meant before language, when gods bled into land and land bled back. The ritual had never been meant to call it. The ritual was meant to submit to it, to finalize a bargain begun long ago, one that Wrenmore made with its first settlers, those who crowned it not with gold, but with silence and surrender. And in that moment, standing before it, I knew I had always been meant to return, not as Harold Quince, but as Halward, the chronicler, the translator, the mouth of the marsh. The final act wasn't words, it wasn't fire, it wasn't sacrifice, it was simply acceptance. I knelt. The Crownless One stepped forward, its limbs moved like branches swaying in an unseen wind. It placed a hand, all bone and bark, atop my head. I did not feel pain. I felt release. My name unraveled from my tongue like silk thread, and in its place I remembered the chants, the glyphs, the oaths buried in peat. I felt my voice deepen, hollow with moss and time. I became a verse in the living hymn of Wrenmore. I don't remember walking back. I only remember the feel of the water, warm and still, closing over my feet, up to my waist, up to my mouth. And the last reflection I saw was not mine. It was a face made of lichen, of half-forgotten lineage, of ritual remembered, the face of the witness. Epilogue extract from the New Fen manuscripts unpublished. He did not vanish, nor was he taken. He became a verse in the great, unending scripture of the marsh. We do not crown him, he is not king, but we listen when he speaks in the fog, and we answer with gifts of teeth and bone. From the marginalia of Harold Quince, Wrenmore Fen Archive, date unknown. You made it back for now, but the things in the dark never truly leave, do they? They watch, they wait, and perhaps they remember you now too. If you want to hear more, if you dare to listen again, step back into the shadows. Like the video, subscribe, but know this, some doors once opened do not close so easily.